Hi, welcome everyone. I'm so happy and honored to have here with us today Bree Johnson. Bree Johnson is a former employment attorney and CEO of Executive Unschool. She helps people and businesses thrive through inner leadership training and healing work wounds. So, welcome, Bree. I'm so happy to have you here with us today.
I'm so glad to be on your podcast with you. Thank you.
You're so welcome. So, something that is jumping out at me immediately, just because it's very new in my world, is that, like me, you formerly worked as an attorney, and not just for a few years, you had a lot of time that you invested into your work as an employment attorney, and then you transitioned to what it is you do now, where you're able to help individuals and businesses really thrive in the work that they do. So I'm interested in hearing how you came about the transition.
Yeah, this pivot space that I've been in for a while, it it was a very so I'll kind of go back in terms of my career and what it's looked like. I started after graduating from law school, taking the bar exam. I had full-time employment as a contract writer. It was like 2009 timeframe, so the recession was pretty strong. And from that initial experience, really built a career on the business side of law, which was for 10 years. I absolutely loved it. And it was really meaningful work to me to bring about business sensibility to the practice of law. So that looked like pricing, profitability. And I was really delighted to do that work. And one of the things when you're in a position that I know a lot of other leaders are bringing change into pretty established, I mean, the practice of law as a profession, very precedent based, very, we've always done it this way.
Mm.
Me running into a lot of brick walls. It's kind of for me reached its natural end to exit that. And I say that now, being about 6 years removed from that, but that was a tough transition. And then started practicing employment law and started and co-founded a boutique employment law firm representing plaintiffs who were harmed in the workplace. Very meaningful work. And yet, what I found for myself was even in that experience of doing work that was, very meaningful to the individual who'd experienced harm in the workplace, I still felt like I was part of a system that wasn't really part of a solution. Like it was for me, it had this feeling on the inside of being kind of the definition of insanity because representing one person through their experience of holding an employer accountable, often, confidential settlements, there's not a lot of first closure. The process itself is sort of re-traumatizing as they're, having to defend their experiences in the workplace. And really at the root for me is there wasn't a lot of change happening within workplaces. And so about a year and a half ago, actually longer than that, we're coming up on 2 years from when I gave notice to the law firm I co-founded after only 18 months of being COO, managing partner of that firm. It became very clear to me I needed another big change. And I feel, we can talk about what that was like because I think it is important to normalize when there's those big ruptures, pivot points, like there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of opportunity and new beginnings. And that's, for the past 18 months, what I've been doing with Executive Unschool is building more around the solution that I think workplaces need. It starts with regulation, regulating your nervous system. And I think that's why we have almost like this epidemic in workplaces of chaos and this grind and the self-abandonment that, I certainly was in through the first 15 years of my career, not really making space and time for what I wanted to do, what felt energetically fulfilling to me, always being that yes person. And so now I bring things that I believe will bring about actual sustainable changes for individuals, but also what's cool is the business. So I've seen profit growth, employee turnover decline. So we're seeing some core numbers that businesses really care about being
Yeah.
influenced by the work that I do with Executive Unschool now.
Wow. It's so packed with so many valid points, and I love that you're giving a voice to all of this. I want to just break it down a little bit because what is also really jumping out at me is how you are valuing not just the individual, like the constituents of a business, of a law firm, of a company, but how important their well-being is in turn for productivity, for the success of the business as a whole, like the collective well-being of a company. And I heard you say like you've experienced like there's some resistance. Not all workplaces are open to some of these modalities. It's kind of like this is the way we've always done it, and depending on the leadership, there could be a little or a lot of pushback. I I see a growing need in the work that I've done being a lawyer working in the legal sector. I see a growing need for not only young associates, but those who've been working in the industry for a long time, but maybe don't know. It's unfamiliar. These resources, these practices are different than what they've turned to in the past to support them. But I think there's a real need. And when you can bring this not only to an individual, but within the culture of the workplace, you can see such transformation, not just for the individual, but again, for the corporation as a whole. But something else that you said that really resonates for me, and again, I'm just a month out from the transition, is the need to regulate our nervous systems.
Mhm.
And this is not, I think, in my experience, just my personal experience, from the conditioning, the way we're conditioned as litigators, and just the volume and the pace at which we're expected to keep up. And not only the pace, but sort of the flavor of our cases and the intensity of the work, we take it on. And so in my experience, I was able, with the help of mindfulness, I was able, the last 10 years, my personal practice of mindfulness and the way I was able to weave that into the work that I did as a litigator is what helped me stay afloat all this time. It's also helped me gain clarity to see that while I enjoyed parts of that work and I was able to help people, like you, I was able to help people. There's more that I feel I can offer in my role as a mindfulness teacher and coach. But what I'm experiencing now is there's still like that residue that really wound up tension and stress that it doesn't just go away overnight because you stepped out of that role as litigator or attorney or whatever the high stress position is. Our nervous systems, it took a long time to, again, just for me to build up how I was feeling. So what are some of the modalities or what are some of the practices that you bring into workplaces or in your one-on-one coaching with individuals? What are some of the resources or practices that can help to calm the nervous system or regulate it?
Mhm. Yeah, there's two that I really lean on heavily. So whether it's a group program or some of my one-on-one work that I do, working with quite a few executives right now, but breath work has been the most transformative. And so I'm a certified hypno breathwork guide, and what those sessions look like, and I'll do these in group formats where I have, 10, 15 people on a call, and they can turn their cameras off, they can get into a comfortable position, and we do about 20 minutes of guided breathing set to music. And what that allows is access to the subconscious and the conscious brain. So when we recognize, like, oh, our relationship to work or the way that we're working maybe isn't healthy for us, or we're feeling really dysregulated, our logic brain is only about 5%. And then there's 95% of our brain's activities, our habits, our actions that are driven by the subconscious brain. So 95%. And that can go back to, when we think about, like, you and I, what was our drive to become an attorney? There might have been seeds planted when we were very young. And so we're not even consciously aware of those seeds, or like the way that we work or how our worth is tied to our work. Like, all of those seeds were planted a long, long time ago. And so breath work helps to give that time to connect back to oneself. You're bringing highly oxygenated blood into the body. So, from a clarity perspective, it calms the nervous system, it brings more oxygen in. You're taking deeper breaths because in this country, we are really poor breathers. Well, all of Western society. We take very shallow, frequent
Yeah.
breaths, but we're not really oxygenating our body. So there's so many benefits to the practice of breath work, but that's my favorite practice to do, um, because of how deep and profound the sort of the insights, that connection to self, but then just the peace that you feel on the other side of it. Even if nothing comes through, you get no clarity, but you just spend 20 minutes breathing. There's like, it's that inner sigh almost that comes
Yeah.
through. But the other one is almost a simpler. I coach a lot and guide people just to take a pause. And so
Mhm.
this is, Viktor Frankl's, between the stimulus and
Mhm.
response, the longer we can put that pause in.
Yeah.
And that's been really, I, I've had clients tell me how much of a game changer that is for them. And I feel like that's almost like overused right now. But why I think it's so impactful is because it enables just pausing. Let's say that email that feels really activating, right?
Mhm.
Opposing counsel. Those are the ones that I can still feel in my body. It's like those
Yeah.
emails, it's like
As
opening
you're
them.
saying it, I feel it in my chest. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. But even colleague messages or that calendar notice from your boss, like a 15-minute touch base, and all of those feelings that flare up. The pause allows you to bring perspective into that moment and also disconnect a little bit from the emotions and maybe that fight or flight that comes up now with
Yeah.
emails that used to come up with, the real threats to our lives in
Right.
caveman days.
Right.
But when we put that pause into the workplace, or people just take a break or they walk away from some of those emails, it just helps to bring down the temperature
Mhm.
instead of when I begin evaluating or doing an audit of a workplace and you have a lot of dysregulation, what I see are those emails flying back and forth. People are flying off the handle. They're throwing garbage cans. They're swearing. I mean, it's just like this volcano, but there's not, what that does is that takes away from people's focus, productivity, right? All their energy is going towards whatever that activation is rather than getting the job done and getting the work done. So those are the two that I usually bring in first and foremost.
I use the quote, Victor's quote, often in the mindfulness-based stress reduction program that I teach. We talk about just that we fall into autopilot, which I know you speak about a lot, and we're totally reactive. We don't give ourselves moments to pause, and then we just promote more autopilot mode and reactivity. But that pause is what creates that space between reacting as opposed to choosing how might be the most skillful way to respond. So whether that's taking a break and going for a walk or a few relaxing sighs, I I personally have seen how it's made the difference before you fire off that email that you know you're going to regret. You're going to regret as soon as it sends, and just taking a moment to notice, like getting back to caveman or cavewoman times. Like it feels threatening when we have that aggressive email or somebody says something. It's like a lion or a tiger are standing in front of us. But when we can create that space, that pause to gain a fresh perspective, to reassess, like, is this really danger zone, and how can I support myself with what is coming through? It is a game changer. And I also, in terms of the breathing, what you're saying is really resonating. So I saw a woman. I've been working with this amazing healer. His name is Rob Mahone. For Philly folks, they may know the Philadelphia Runner, a common running store in Philadelphia. And his brother at the time worked at the store. I was having some issues with my foot, and he referred me to his brother, who I'm convinced he has superpowers, but he does hands-on body work, and he frees up areas where there's holding so that the body's more aligned. And if you're having discomfort, it literally, he gives you what's known as homework, and it melts away. Or at least, again, in my experience, it did. So we've had a relationship in that regard for like 15 years. And just last year, when I was telling him that I was sort of grappling with some conflict about making this transition, and And so he said, I'm going to recommend someone to you who is a healer like him, but not like a structural, more of a emotional, spiritual healer. So I saw her last year and I went back last night, and she uses a few different modalities and worked with chakras, but one being the breath. In the mindfulness classes that I teach, a lot of times you don't have to focus on the breath in terms of like you don't have to change it or control it. It's more about the attending, like you're directing your attention to the breath. And when we can just rest attention on the breath, oftentimes that can incline us in the direction of relaxation, getting out of like the conscious mind. Like we're not having to think about our to-do list or the what ifs or the should haves, but we're just feeling. It's like more of a felt experience than a cognitive type situation. But the breathing last night was different because it was a very conscious, a very controlled in a way type of breath work where the inhale was long, like breathing in for 7 and imagining the breath moving up through the body, and the exhale, like a long exhale and for a decent amount of time. And it was transformational, just the breathing alone, like that deep breathing and the releasing, it combined with some of the other magic I say that she uses, but it takes you to a subconscious place where you're not so caught up in the narrative and you're feeling more, and there's a certain clarity that you can obtain, which it doesn't end like after the session. Like it's even today I'm feeling into that. So I'm a big supporter, I'm a big believer in breath work. Little newer to that type of breath work, but I do think that it is a huge support that oftentimes we're not even aware that we're breathing. Like our breath when we're feeling stressed is tends to be more narrow or shallow rather, and fast. But when we can bring attention to it, whether we're trying to practice a certain type of breathing or we're just resting attention on it, that we can see a shift in how we're feeling and how we're perceiving what's
Mhm.
here.
Yeah. Can I
So,
interject? I think one of the
yeah.
things as it relates to breath work that's so important if someone hasn't tried it or has trepidation around it is to say that breath work is supportive of a lot of different states. And so by that, I mean, certainly it's very effective stress reduction, nervous system regulation. So, when you're not feeling great or when you need that perspective or when you just need to calm down, those are all really great reasons to try a breath work. But I also think there's the other side of it, which I use sometimes in workplaces, is like to get into flow state to help you drop some of the gravel tasks that may be around when you really need to get into focus.
Yeah.
It can be really effective for anyone who's doing creative work. And if you have a creative block, my husband's a musician and he plays guitar, and using it to, you know, find new songs or just find energy and vitality around, going to do the same song again. But that
Yeah.
creative,
Yeah.
so breath work is really effective in a variety of ways.
And to the point where, in my experience, it's almost like effortless. It's whatever the task at hand. If you're playing music, if you're listening to music, whatever it is you're doing. I mean, I've seen it with like a pile full of dishes. Like when you can just feel as if you're flowing and not having to strive, it's it makes things more enjoyable, and I think it opens us up to greater possibility whatever it is we're doing. So yeah,
Yeah.
I love that as well. I know that in your experience before making the transition, that you faced some adversity in the workplace, and I'm interested to hear how that, like in what ways that influenced the work that you're doing now, because I know that one of the big components that you work on with people and with organizations is healing what are known as work wounds. So if you
Mhm.
can sort of explain for us the your experience with adversity and how that sort of shaped what it is you offer to those who are trying to heal work wounds.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, my experience has been really in several of the roles that I've had throughout my career. There have been moments, typically which last, several months in duration of a lot of angst, a lot of conflict, a lot of pain, primarily interpersonal. And so I had those like my own experiences with that and my own experiences of being a woman, being a young woman in a C-level position, the comments and there's just, sort of small things, but they don't always feel like small things on the inside. And so there's been a number of experiences that sort of like rolled into or snowballed into my why to begin practicing employment law. I was like, okay, I want to find more meaning, more mission in my work and wanting to provide advocacy to people who'd been harmed in the workplace. So I had my own experiences. Then I began practicing, and I was responsible for handling the intake at our law firm after we launched for many months. And that really was probably more shaping in some ways because we'd get 10 to 20 calls or emails, right? And the variety of really awful, harmful, toxic experiences that people had. I mean, it ran the gamut and it became very difficult to listen to day in and day out.
These
Um,
were just to clarify. So for our listeners or viewers, these were people who were calling into the firm for assistance, for legal assistance, and you're the person who they're sharing what they're going through. So I imagine you can only put boundaries up so much that you're taking on what it is they're sharing with you, what they've gone through. Right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And there were, core claims of discrimination, of sexual harassment, of sexual assault, of wrongful termination, all in the workplace. And so it really ran the gamut. And those are the maybe actionable claims. There were a lot of people who experienced what I wanted to normalize when I started to do this body of work around work wounds with Executive Unschool and why I talk about this in the way that I do is there are those legal claims and some people fit, the experiences they had fit into those, but there was this large number of people that had experiences that were very impactful for them. It was very difficult. It made their life really, really hard, but there wasn't actually a legal claim to make. And so I felt it was really important when I started Executive Unschool and began to do this work to talk about it more generally and talk about work wounds in
Yeah.
the way that I do, because we have acknowledged as a society, and I think through our culture of normalizing things like therapy and counseling, that there are wounds and traumatic experiences that we have in our personal life,
Yeah.
even from childhood. I think there's a greater acknowledgement of that. And from my own perspective, what I didn't see and wanted to bring a voice to was that there are these wounds that we experience in our work, in part because of our Western culture that says the work you do is your worth, right? And I'm saying like as a generalization, that's sort of they're intermingled.
Yeah.
What's the first question you get asked at a party? What do you do? Right. And that's because we place such a, and if you're able to say, oh, you're a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant, right? Those are the, sought after roles, right? And we begin to
Yeah.
place people. And so it's just this fabric of our culture that says our work is what is like your worth and things like that
We
as a
measure
stereotype.
ourselves, right? We measure ourselves by our status or our titles. And yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. And so what happens then is when people experience a rupture or a break of that, or maybe they get a bad review or they're laid off, they
Yeah.
still have this deeply affecting experience, but we haven't, as a culture, spent a lot of time marking about that. So that's where work wounds comes in, talking about this more broadly. I break work wounds down when I talk about this and in my research into three categories. It's feelings of betrayal,
Hmm.
and that's really where, being laid off or that job review or where somebody that you thought was a really close colleague all of a sudden flips and is now, kind of throwing you under the bus.
Yeah.
Those types of experiences fall under that feelings of betrayal. Then there's bad behavior, which, the discrimination, the sexual harassment definitely falls under. And then there's bullying. And that's some of those microaggressions that come up that really don't have recourse under the law, but again, are very impactful for a person who is experiencing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can speak from personal experience. I mean, talk about a work wound that just wowed me and it spoke volumes for the organization as a whole when you have, I think it's no matter who it is, if it's a colleague, it's the peer who says something or does something, that is in and of itself terrible. But when you have a leader of a firm, a leader of a large company who says something or does something, I think it's the damage is is pretty powerful.
Hmm.
And it can change the way you feel, even if you love the work that you do
Yeah.
or you love the people you work with. When there's someone who's supposed to be a leader, but they carry themselves in a way and speak to others in such a tone, I think it really taints what the company is about and the way they're viewed by by you or by others who have heard that individual carry themselves in that way. And so, get in my from my training, from what it is that I do, and that's my mindfulness role, a certain awareness, especially by leaders, I think is so important so that they can be aware of not only the things that they do, the things that they say, and the way that ripples out that can change the experience for one individual, can change the experience collectively for an organization, and it can change how engaged, how little engagement there is, and how much people want to be there and how much they want to do a good job or don't want to do a good job. So what are some of the ways, whether it's a leader, executive or some professional in a workplace, if they're struggling with some type of workplace wound, what's one of the ways that you can help to improve that situation for the individual or maybe for the workplace as a whole?
Hmm. Yeah, I usually start at the individual level in part because typically, like the tipping point for someone to reach out to me is often, especially because I talk a lot about work wounds, that they themselves are experiencing
Yeah,
something that feels really affecting and they've tried things, maybe they've tried having conversations with HR or they've tried, to make a protected report and it's not getting better and it's not getting better almost on that felt experience side
yeah,
of things. And so where I start is we've got a framework that I use, which is the RACE acronym. But it's the regulation activities. So at first pass, I think it's so important to bring about some regulation. Somebody who is like actively, maybe they're still working there, is usually, I say, when you're in it, there's not really going to be healing, but we can at least get a grounded sense, like a little more connection to self, a little more grounded, so that it's not that sort of spinning
yeah,
that happens. So
yeah,
we start with regulation for the R. Then the A is we work through ABCs. So this is awareness of your ABCs, your agreements, your beliefs, and your conditioning. And so why I think that step is so important, and I think there's not maybe as much around this, is sometimes when people talk about their toxic or harmful work experiences, there's this pointing the finger. And so, what the work in the awareness, we spend some time actually working through like, what are your agreements about work? What are your beliefs about work? Where has your conditioning about what it means to work, what it means to be a good employee, what it means to be successful? Because there are often things that we are doing in maybe even in a cycle of conflict that we're contributing to it too. And I don't mean that to put it all on that person, but it becomes very helpful to not feel in that place of like, this is all happening to me, and to
right.
offer a reminder that there is opportunity to make their own changes. They can
Mhm.
leave, they can, there's a lot, and sometimes it's so powerful just to show them the bevy of options available to them, but we have to kind of work through that.
Yeah, like a sense of agency and to not feel trapped. I think
Yeah.
where we go is not, I say we like generally, but that in my experience, sometimes you get caught in the story and you don't see that there's so many possibilities, but you become trapped. But when you can sense into your sense of agency and that there are choices, there are options, I think that's very liberating.
Yeah, Absolutely. And then, just kind of walk through the last, and then the C is connecting to those habits and actions. And so that looks like, I want to kind of break it down, how I've worked with, there's a leader who is in a dynamic with a supervisor that is really not tenable. They're, not, their styles are not a match. And they're feeling sort of micromanaged on one hand and sort of bullied on the other. And so, first step with the R, get that regulation, then looking at those agreements, beliefs, the conditioning that comes from like, what did your parents, how did they model work to you and how has that informed
Mhm.
you today? How
Mhm.
have all your work experiences informed you? And then we go to C and connecting that to habits and actions. So, like, what are your habits or actions? And one of the things that we uncovered with this particular leader I was working with is that she has such an entrenched sense of value in being productive in a very prestigious role
Mhm.
that sometimes pushes her to do things, say yes to things because of that, like, need to strive. And so when
Yeah,
we unpack that, we can see how the ABCs then inform the way we show up in our habits and our actions. And then that opens the door to choosing differently, which is the E of expand. And I often talk about it in terms of expand by subtracting, because our society and work, we like to say, okay, more, 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 that task list just gets longer. And I actually think we are more productive as people, as leaders, even in our, home lives, when we have less. When we have less to do, there's less tasks, we're more clear-eyed about
yeah,
what's the one thing that I want to be working towards. And so that's the sort of the model or the method. It looks a little different for each individual I work through. But it's very effective at disrupting any of that, pointing the finger only externally,
right.
gaining that clarity on the inside, and being able to empower them to make changes or to just feel better and redefine their relationship to work on their own terms.
It sounds to me like it embodies mindfulness in that you're deepening your self-awareness when you can identify some of your beliefs, some of your habits that maybe don't serve you well, and then you can begin to understand your relationship to them and unravel them, and then in turn with your assistance create healthier, more nourishing habits that are going to support you. That just seems like you not only help these individuals gain a better understanding of their ways, but they they learn new ways to really thrive in
Without
what
it.
it is they're
Mhm.
doing. So that's interesting. So, and it's the acronym is RACE,
Yeah.
RACE. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
So in the work that you, well, I should step back. So this individual who you were talking about, did you, I'm not sure if you're still working together with her, but if, despite whether you are or not, did you or did she see some type of transformation after she went through this sort of exploration, I would say? And
Mm.
yeah, how did
Yeah.
it land for her?
Yeah, I think the common themes, it's applicable for this individual, but also of, several other clients I've worked with is first and foremost, it's that depth of connection that is back to self and more easeful ability to answer the question, what do I really want?
Yeah,
Not what society told me, not what my parents told me I wanted as it relates to work, not what I thought I had to do to be, to make people proud, to make people love me. But there's just this connection of like, what do I want? And
yeah,
often in this individual's situation, it looks like they're redefining work. So they've left their role. That doesn't
yeah,
always happen. It's just as common that people are redefining their relationship to work. So they're not as in it, right? It's like it doesn't affect them on the inside. They have that separation that's so much more healthy to be able to handle the ebbs and flows of work. So that separation. So sometimes it means they leave, but sometimes it means that they're just in a better place when those hits come, or they're better able to handle it. Or in another case, they're more willing to have really courageous conversations and stand up for themselves because they've kind of reconnected back in.
yeah. I was just going to bring up the word reconnection, and I think that's a huge part of how you help others to heal. We
Mhm.
were, Annie and I, who's not able to be here today, but Annie and I had a guest on recently, Rachel Barbaro, who's an executive coach, and we were talking about, generally speaking, women, we have so many hats that we wear, like at any given moment, when I was working as an attorney, but also teaching mindfulness, I would wake up and I'd be like, okay, what hat am I wearing right now? Like, oh, right now I'm a litigator. Like I have to be of a certain mindset or behavior. And oh, okay, later this afternoon, I'm offering a mindfulness workshop. And later I'm very much playing, not playing, but I'm in the mom role. And so we become kind of compartmentalized. And I think where that creates some type of, again, in my experience, where it creates a certain hurdle or a disconnect is when in the work that we do, and we spend a lot of time working, when we don't feel as if we're connected to who we are, like deeply connected with our authenticity and what brings us joy, and we're so compartmentalized, like this is here, this is there. That disconnect, I think it's very hard to get a sense of grounding. And so what is so huge in what you're teaching and helping these women to do in terms of healing is that when we can reconnect with who we are, even though it's always here, but we get pulled in so many different ways that we lose sight of that. But when we can take out the pieces of the puzzle, so to speak, that pull us away from who we really are, and we can create that space and then bring in the pieces that only strengthen who it is we are and what we have to offer, it's that in and of itself is such a teaching and such a healing piece that I have found with sort of my transition, that there's a deeper connection to self. And when you can feel connected to yourself, I think you're that much more able to deeply connect with others, whether it's your clients, family, friends, strangers even.
Mhm.
So reconnecting to oneself really resonates pretty powerfully for me. Another area I wanted to briefly touch upon, which I know you focus your work on, is inner leadership.
Mhm.
So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about what that means to you, and how does it show up in effective leaders in the workplace?
Yeah. A lot of my work in this space can be summed up by the book for the Four Agreements, if you're familiar with it. Um, and so I use that loosely as the foundation for teaching and training and doing a lot of leadership development in a few areas, being impeccable with your word. And really, so much of that looks like uh, how are we um, working with and making space for, but not allowing our inner critic to be in the driver's seat. Because so
Yeah,
for so many of us, like really driven achievers, that
yeah,
inner critic is just brutal. So that's typically some of the work that we do. But like being impeccable with your word, having integrity, that's an inner leadership because so much of it starts with how we talk to ourselves.
yeah,
Then that, the external then comes after that. The second agreement is not to take things personally. And this looks like, but there's so many occasions in day-to-day work where we can take things personally. Some offhand comments somebody made, somebody said something in a meeting, right? All the
yeah,
ways we take things personally, but that really derails our energy availability for the work that matters.
yeah,
Then we talk about always doing your best, and that best is going to look different at different points. And that kind of gives that space to infuse some well-being into the conversation. And then not making assumptions is the other agreement as well. So those four, we do a lot of work in those areas, really bringing that message home, a lot of reflection around those agreements because I think that those are like the guiding lights of if you are able to bring awareness in those four ways to your habits and actions as they relate to these four, a lot of things can change in terms of how you lead other people. Because again, it is that inner leadership. We're going to start with ourselves. We're shining that mirror first and foremost. And it's interesting because I've had a few clients who, when we're going through this program, they want to flip that mirror and be like, oh, they take things personally. It's like, no, 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 we're not going there. Like, this is all about you
yeah,
first.
yeah,
But
yeah,
you can see people's habits come up as they want to be like, oh, David, he's the one who always takes things personally. I can see him
yeah.
getting, it's like, but how about you? How do you? And we like really kind of come back to self.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much easier to just point the finger the other way. The hard work is turning inward and exploring what's coming up for us. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think as leaders and high performers, we are our hardest critics. And I speak, just being a perfectionist and wanting to do a good job. Again, it's coming from a good place. I want to do a good job in whatever, if I'm making my kids lunch for school, like I want everything to be just so. And if I'm working, when I was working on cases, I wanted to do the best possible job. But when we're so critical of ourselves and when we get caught up in that inner voice and we're judging our every move, it it really gets in the way. It's an impediment to what we can ultimately achieve. What we teach in mind with the mindfulness based stress reduction program and in coaching is we're in this culture, we're largely conditioned to be judgmental of ourselves and of others. Like as you're saying, oh, it's not me, no, it's him. Look at the way he's doing. He's not doing that right. But the more and more we can see that, just our tendency to judge ourselves and to judge others, it's not removing the judgmental piece. It's something that's here. But when we're able to recognize it, that becomes the doorway to not having to believe. We don't have to believe that inner narrative, and we can cultivate a bit more kindness, cut ourselves some slack. What I also like that you said is like our performing our best. There's a difference between performing our best and having to be perfect. Like sometimes best in my world, best equals perfect, but not necessarily so. Best can mean good enough. Like
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be perfect. And it's amazing. There's a poem that I believe it's called Enough, but it just takes the bar down a few notches. And when we know that we've fully showed up, that we've done our best, but it doesn't have to be perfect, like it's good enough. That judgmental piece and that sense of ease, like the judgmental piece sort of is more in the background and ease comes into the foreground. And when we, getting back to regulation, like when we can soothe ourselves, when we can have the parasympathetic system kick into gear and we feel more at ease, we feel safer, we feel calm, that's when we're going to shine. That's when we're really going to excel in whatever it is we're doing in the moment, or just being, not even having to do, but just feeling our best. So I love those three, and then the fourth was assumption. And I,
Mhm.
I think that kind of falls for me. What's showing up is like how often we
Mhm.
project onto others, or we think, we know how a situation is, but when we can get out of our sort of rigid mindset and no, that may be one situation, I'm assuming it one way, but there's another way, or even another way.
Mhm.
So there that all really, really, really great ways to explore, what's here, and how can
Mhm.
we how can we open ourselves up to greater possibility.
Yeah.
So I know we're getting close to the end of the time that we have together for this episode, but I wanted to dive a little bit more into how you, in all that you're doing and all of the ways you're helping others, how do you find a sense of balance? Like what's your daily practice like?
Yeah. Great question.
Yeah.
I love my nighttime rituals. So, I've tried like a really consistent morning, and with the kiddos and the bus and sometimes like the schedule disruption in the
Yeah.
morning's not it for me. So
Yeah.
what happens is the boys, I have two boys, 11 and 8, and once they go to bed, then that's really my time.
Yeah.
And some nights that looks like I'm guiding myself through a breath work, or I'm
Mhm.
doing a breath work from an app, or I'm doing a meditation, or I'm taking a bath and journaling. But I really protect that time. I do not disturb comes on at 8 o'clock. And so I'm just not on, I'm maybe on my phone for personal things, but I'm not
Yeah.
getting, those interruptions, if you will, like the
Right.
text messages and things like that or emails coming through. So my nighttime is my protected time, and
Yeah.
that feels really good for me. And then the other thing I prioritize is time in sunlight.
Mm.
So on my watch, I love looking at that stat and seeing my time in sunlight go up so much this year. So a near daily, I'm in Minnesota, so it haven't been walk because we had a lot of snow lately, but 45-minute walk outside has been really helpful,
Yeah.
more often than not.
That I love that, that just to make it a conscious, to almost make it like a date with yourself and the sun to feel that, and you get your vitamin D fix, which is
Exactly.
always a good thing. But
Yeah.
like you, I really value like my sort of outlet for movement would be like a really hard like workout class, and I'm crushing it. But more and more as and as I've really heavily explored what this transition has meant to me, and getting to this point, it's been slowing down, and the walks and being out in nature, and not having to like crush it, like to just slow down and feel the sun and feel the air. So that really resonates with me. I have to say I respect the nighttime routine. Mine, when I try to practice breath work or seated meditation or some type of formal practice at nighttime, it's like within 2 minutes I'm conked out. So mine, I'm the opposite. I tend to be like an early morning like person, where that space before the grind of, like I say, it's like the assembly line of the lunches and getting the kids off, that tends to be the most supportive time for me. But I want to just say that for our listeners, for our viewers, that Bree is awesome with social media. That just in my transition and in the short amount of time that we've known each other, you share, like you show yourself practicing what it is you teach others, and that really radiates out. Like I get glimpses of that, and it's very inspiring. It's been a huge support pillar for me in getting to this point. So I thank you for not only offering this through the work that you do, but like sharing a glimpse into your world, because it makes a difference in, at least for me, in how I've experienced this transition and how I've deepened my personal practice. So thank you for that. Before we end the episode, I'm just going to put a little question out there. I'm curious to know, being that we're coming to the end of 2024, by the time this airs, we'll be into 2025. But is there anything, either professionally or personally, that you're looking to manifest in the new year?
Ooh, I am manifesting a lot of things, but there's two things that came in, which was more connection. I feel like this year was connection with others, is what I mean.
Yeah,
In spaces, and so I'm hosting a speaker series January, February, and March because I want to get more voices active in conversations that matter.
yeah,
And so I'm really excited for that, and that's coming forward. But that is really a sort of a byproduct of a deep desire to manifest just being with more people, putting myself out there, networking spaces and otherwise. That's
yeah.
important to me this year. And then the other thing is I'm manifesting a book deal. So I'm working on my nonfiction book proposal and have been for many months. And we'll be putting it out to publishers at the end of January. And it's on the topic of work wounds and, kind of the sentiment of what can we do when there are work wounds that we have, and what's within our control, and really this sense of empowerment and empowering others through their journeys. So I'm
Yeah.
hopeful that that gets picked up, and that's top of mind for me in 25.
Oh, I feel confident it'll be picked up. I feel very confident about that. What if our audience wants to, I know you said it's until later in January, but if they want to keep an eye out for that, if they want to reach out to you to work with you, whether it's a workplace, an organization, or an individual, how is best for them to reach out to you?
Yeah. So the best place to find me is at our business website, which is executiveunschool.com. On there, if you want to stay connected, we have our Stress Less Leader newsletter. And so you can get signed up for a newsletter right on the website. That's going to be the best place to stay kind of current with the events and things that are coming up. And if you want to connect in a more fun space, I'm a little more free, and you'll see, all sides of me is my personal brand page on Instagram, which is at Bree Johnson Official.
I love it. Like I mentioned, it brings a smile to my face and so much valuable content, but in a light, fun way. So yeah, please keep me connected. I know your first theme or idea of what you'd like to manifest is connecting with others. I'd love to stay connected and to contribute in any way I can to what you're doing because I think you have so much to offer. You really are a shining light, and I'm excited for your book and to continue to follow you and all that it is you're doing. So thank you, Bree, so much for joining me today, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.